source. So Jesus, we do come before you as those fully aware that all the beauty and the glory of what is offered and available through Jesus, we don't always experience it. We are weak and finite and frail, and yet that is not beyond your concern. Coming one of us so that you might rescue us, walking through every trial and temptation as one who can empathize with us uniquely because of that. Oh, would we be captivated by you, the incarnate Lord, the eternal one, the everlasting one, come as a man, that he might save mankind. May we marvel at that today, even, Jesus. I pray. Amen. Amen. You know, they don't make video games quite like they used to. And back when I was a kid, we had this football game, and you were allowed to make your own players. And it's almost like they knew what, a middle school boy wanted to do. They wanted to stack every single one of their players with all the abilities and then play on easy and beat the smithereens out of everybody you played. And actually I did that. I did win 100-0 most days. But you also can make your own players, but they forced you. They only allotted you so many character points, and you had to decide how you would spend them. Okay, so if you had a running back you were going to beef up, did you want to make him, stronger, or did you want to make him faster? You couldn't be a perfect in both. If you had a good quarterback, did you want him to be really accurate with his arm, or to have that speed to be able to also run around the end and be like a triple option threat? You had to choose. Well, today, we're going to be looking at Jesus in Luke chapter 7, and we're going to have to contend with what we're going to view as a paradox, because he doesn't have the same limitations as my poor little football players. And so as we get a better, more clear picture of Jesus, he's going to walk as a walking paradox. He's going to break the messianic mold, the mold of all the restrictions that humans have on themselves. And we're going to see something that he has a ministry marked both with deep-seated compassion or empathy and all the authority in the world. Join me in Luke 7. And there's actually going to be two stories. We're going to chunk them up so we don't lose both, but we'll come back together and tie it up at the end. Luke chapter 7, if you're in one of our Bibles in the back, page 811, I'll get you right where you need to be. Luke chapter 7, verse 1. After he had finished saying all of these things in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. Now a centurion had a servant who was sick and at the point of death, and who was highly valued by him. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent to him elders of the Jews, asking him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is the one who built for us our synagogue." And Jesus went with them. When he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore, I did not presume to come to you, but say the word, and let my servant be healed. For I too am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes. I say to another, 'Come,' and he comes. And to my servant, I say, 'Do this,' and he does it." And Jesus heard these things. He marveled at him and turned to the crowd that followed him, saying, "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such a faith." For when those who had been sent, and when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the servant well. Okay, so this is only about 10 verses, but it's moving very, very quickly and very rapidly. And so maybe you didn't catch this, but the scene's moving very, very quickly in 10 verses covering 4 acts. This is a 4-act play. First starting from a centurion and his dying servant, moving quickly to these sent elders, encountering and requesting Jesus, pivoting back towards the house. A third scene emerges where sent elders are being confronted by friends now, and even though the journey has halted, the request for healing remains, and the final scene ends happily ever after with a healed servant who's loved. As it often happens in the arc of a storyline, the critical information we're looking for, we're going to focus in on, is going to happen in that third act. But we need not to get ahead of ourselves. As we've learned, the opening scene sets up everything that follows. And if you remember, we've just been on this sermon on the plain, where we've just heard these powerful words of Jesus that define the narrow way of following him. And so he returns to Capernaum. Capernaum is where his ministry base is out of. This is where he met Peter and healed the mother-in-law, right? This is where a lot of that is taking place. And so we're left then, this unfolding plan of redemption. We've got Jesus sent to the favored people of Israel. But here our story centers on the concerns of a Gentile centurion and his concerns for his highly valued servant. Now, a centurion would have been in the army of Herod Antipas, in subservience to him, and he would have had 100 people under his watchful care. And since Romans didn't, until about 10 years later, give Romans this position, we're likely to believe that this is a non-Roman person of authority that comes from one of the territories that have been occupied and conquered. And so he's there, a Gentile, in this place, doing his job. And he has this servant highly valued. This can speak to the critical function that he serves him, or it could be more likely that he's a confidant. He's somebody he cares about deeply for his desired companionship. In either case, this servant has taken ill, and death seems imminent. And perhaps we're given a clear picture then as to why he's been entrusted with this allotment of soldiers in this place and time, as he moves now with diplomatic excellency, navigating the nuances of that cultural broken situation where, as a Gentile coming in to a Jewish landscape, he doesn't presume to tell Jesus what to do, but instead leans on his favor with Jewish elders, sending them on his behalf. And we see this because of their Jewish background. It would be much more fitting for them to approach Jesus, a Jew, in his own right. But furthermore, we see that these Jewish elders, like, what on earth are they doing on good terms with a Gentile leader unless he has been, as Paul elsewhere speaks to many people in the Roman Empire, is somebody who feared God, somebody who was empathetic to the causes of Yahweh, the God of Israel. And so he's navigating these relationships incredibly well, sending them on his behalf, speaking to his positive public perception. And so the story moves now quickly into that second scene, where Jewish elders representing this centurion, they speak with such glowing review, don't they? Oh, Jesus, come and help this man out. He loves our nation. This is the guy. We put his name on the footstone when you first walk in of our synagogue. He is supporting it, underwriting it. In a word, he is worthy of your healing touch. He's earned the right to have you serve him in this way. You ever been in a situation where you had to bite your tongue? I wasn't very good at that growing up. In fact, I had such a terrible reputation that my wife gave me this beautiful shirt that says, "I bring the awkward." I had this expectation of putting my foot in my mouth. What went before me was an expectation that ignorance and need for attention would usually take us well beyond the line of what we would call appropriate. But Jesus is here, so full of the Spirit, he casts the mold for self-control, leaving the obvious irony of this testimony sitting, and immediately goes with the Jewish elders, walking with them into our third scene, which is where we find the sweetness of this message packed and tucked away for us to discover. The sent Jewish elders lead the way with Jesus. Observant crowds, as would be custom, not too far behind. And as they make the approach, the centurion's property, clearly within sight, he sends another delegation, this time not Jewish elders, but his own personal friends, to stop the caravan before they get too close. Well, what's the message he sends this time? I don't wish to trouble you, Jesus. An awareness of a sensitivity to the defilement that Jesus would take on to himself if he were to enter into a Gentile establishment. Clearly indicating, those of us who've been following Jesus, we know that this isn't his concern, because he's the kind of person who steps into the unclean space, making it clean with his perennial cleanliness, his purity as the sent Son of Man. But with that elder's sales pitch still ringing in our ears, this guy is worthy. We get this man's own self-assessment which contradicts. I am not worthy. Undoubtedly, he's been granted regional authority. He sends Jewish elders and now his friends. He would not be found to presume any measure of authority over Jesus. Don't come any closer. Don't risk defilement, showing his incomplete understanding of who Jesus is. He explains to him, as a man who's been nestled so deeply into Rome's military infrastructure, he uniquely understands how authority works. He has those in authority over him, which sets the boundaries for his reign of these 100 men. He has those underneath of him, those who he says go, and they go. He says come, and they come. Imagine if you've got concerns about how our government is spending their money. Are you going to go talk to President Biden? Could you knock on the door of a cabinet member? Even your own state representative is quite difficult to get an ear. And yet, here we have structures of authority. They place layers of distance between those with and without that same authority. This is the dynamic at play. There is authority which puts distance between those who have it and those who do not. Stuck in a desperate situation, he surveys the daily Galilean life. And what is he going to do with the pressing concern of death for his beloved servant, but go to the one place he has seen those stricken with illness that will certainly lead to death walk away healed? His desperate situation leaves him one place to turn, and that is to Jesus, endowed with all authority and yet always approachable. Submitting to the supremacy of Jesus' authority, he makes his appeal for healing, knowing full well that nothing, not even spatial distance, could stop his healing decree. This Gentile may not be worthy, but his faith in Jesus is well-founded. After perhaps the cutting clarity brought by the Sermon on the Plain, it's almost as if Luke knew that this audience might appreciate a little bit of comedic relief. And today he packs it into this story with an unmistakable irony. First, the elder saying he's worthy, followed by his own self-assessment, I'm not worthy. And second, Jesus wants to encourage his entire Judean audience that if you want to have faith that turns my head, gets my attention, you need to have faith like a Gentile. Verse 9, when Jesus heard this response, these things, he marveled at him. And turning to the crowd that followed, he said, tell you the truth, not even in Israel have I found such faith. Describing the emotional reaction of Jesus, amazed. He's marveling at this display of faith. One of the rare instances throughout Scripture where now the authors are going to give you the emotional movement within the person of Jesus. Second of all, it tells us the audience, not even with Israel has he seen faith, which is ironic, isn't it? Didn't we just read a chapter ago or two in 5? There were some faithful friends with such faith they lowered their friend down through the tiles on the ceiling. And not only getting healing for his paralysis, he got cleansed and forgiven of his sins. Even with this context that Luke knows we're full aware of, he speaks to the nature of this faith, but it begs the question, why is this faith so special? Have you ever been trying to solve a problem? It could be trying to navigate your kids' personal schedules, or maybe at work, you've got a problem that has come up and you just cannot, there's too many layers, and you're working really hard to figure this thing out. You've got to account for resources and how they're going to be allocated. You need to account for the sensitivity of time that is a deadline pressing in. You need to know what personnel do we have available in this moment, and you are in the ringer, deep in the woods. You're phoning your friends. You've got adjacent managerial staff or family members looking at this problem, trying to get any insight, and in walks the janitor or the youngest child, and out of nowhere says some stupid comment. Upon considering, solves the entire complex problem. So simple, if solves in an instant that which had you hamstrung for hours. I feel like this is what makes the centurion's faith so remarkable. He's not encumbered by the broken infrastructure of the Jewish religious system. The Roman centurion can see clearly the truth about who Jesus is. He has authority. Absolute authority that even the Jews who've been sitting courtside to this entire supreme authority display on the daily seem to miss. So rare. The Jewish elders, the centurion sends, are themselves ignorant intermediaries who seem to think that he should receive Jesus' healing touch on the basis of his worth rather than the surpassing worth of the one for whom they've been sent. Faith is so amazing that Jesus commends it. Jesus holds it up as a standard of faith that could be emulated by all. What shape does this commendable faith take? I think what makes it so amazing is it's removed of the hesitations and expectations that people place on God that are somehow become blinders, restricting who God is and what he can do. What Jesus should or shouldn't do wasn't on the centurion's radar at all. Only what Jesus could do. And if Jesus could do it, then commendable faith approaches with a boldness that he would do it yet again. Said another way, oh no. I don't have it up there. All right, let me just tell you how I says it. Commendable faith sees Jesus rightly and responds accordingly. Commendable faith sees Jesus rightly and then appeals accordingly. Do you ever feel like you have to understand everything before you can move forward to do anything? Friends, this is not how Christianity works. This is not how following Jesus into maturity works. The ways of God allow for incremental dependence, meaning you can exercise faith today simply on the basis of what you see clearly today. And as far as it depends on the centurion, he knew for a fact that there was one who had a proven authority to heal disease. And so, when he was desperate, it was for Jesus he sent. So what's your desperate right now? Is it physical? Is it financial? What's got you in knots? Is it relational? Or is it even spiritual? Wrestling with your own status with God. What would commendable faith look like for you today? It seems that we need to understand, first and foremost, who it is who has all authority, and then who alone is entirely worthy. And when you get that dynamic mixed up, you're going to have some problems. Because if you know you're not worthy, but you doubt Jesus' authority, what kind of faith is that? You will join those who refuse to let the truth of God's intervening love outshine their own self-pity. Postured as needy and yet refusing the rescue that Jesus offers. If you think you are worthy, that you're owed the benefits of Jesus' authority, what kind of faith is that? You join the entitled masses who cheapen God's grace by thinking you're something that you're not. Postured as children, bastards we remain. See, commendable faith sees Jesus rightly and appeals accordingly. Bold humility as ones who know they're not worthy. Faith-filled hope in him who is worthy. And in unsurprising fashion, for those who've been walking with Jesus for a minute or two, the servant is restored to full health. And Luke keeps going with another story. Can you handle another one? We can stop. I'm kidding. I've already written it. We're going to go. Verse 11. So soon afterwards, he went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. And as he... Sorry. We have an inside joke in our family. So I may or may not have read this story with our kids last night. My wife read it, and then as she was reading it, she said Nain, and so I said, Nain. And then she'd read another sentence, and I would say, Nain. And I would just kind of keep interrupting, and now my kids are doing that. So thank you for joining in on our family humor. I love you, Nora. Soon afterwards, he went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. And as he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said to her, Do not weep. And he came up and touched the bier and the bearers, and stood still. And he said, Young man, I say to you, arise. And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people. And this report about him spread throughout the whole of Judea and into the surrounding country. You know, if the prior story is marked with irony, then this story is filled with offense. Can you even imagine this scene? In all of your years, of all the funerals for your family members and friends you've attended, could you even imagine, in the midst of the procession, a fanatic breaks out from the crowd, bangs on the rooftop of the hearse, calling it to stop. And as the Cadillac glass disappears into the door panel, you see the tear-stained woman, tear-stained cheeks of mascara from a broken-hearted woman. You ignore it completely and tell her right now in this moment, hold your tears. The mortician and his assistant are called to open up the back of that hearse, to pull out the body, open the door so that he might properly address the corpse. And once addressed, that corpse is revived. It sounds like such an absurd scene that is loaded with offense. Think about that scenario. It's so offensive, we don't even know how to appreciate it. We have to laugh. But could you imagine this scene? Jesus interrupts an interment for a fast decaying body. Jesus corrects the weeping widow who is overwhelmed with sorrow. He touches the defiled casket, the stretcher on which the body laid, calling the corpse to wake up. Why would Jesus even tread such offensive waters? You know the answer, because Luke told us, move with compassion. He says, do not weep. Why does Jesus have such compassion? Luke has layered these details to emphasize precisely how desperate this woman's situation is. She is a widow grieving the death of her only son. In first century cultures, a husband would be the primary means of a family's provision. Now, without a husband, a widow, a son, firstborn son, will do, is to be the primary means of provision for this woman. Without a husband or a son, this woman is destitute, alone, and penniless. And so the sudden loss of her beloved son is no doubt bringing about the grief that comes with such loss, invoking these tears. But it's this dire situation that lies ahead that soaks each one of those tears with volume that you can't imagine. And Jesus, it says, he saw her, he had compassion, and said, "Do not weep." He enters into that entire offensive scene we talked about and calls up for the dead man, "Arise." Fear seized them all, and they glorified God. "God has visited his people," they cried. And isn't that the response that is required? Fear and praise. See, a proper encounter with Jesus might produce this pair in you: fear and praise. Unlikely exposure to the supernatural left this group of people spouting out claims to try to make sense of the powerful personality and God's special provision that interrupted their grief. We're told they declare these things. A great prophet has come. God has visited his people. This is a classic case where people are speaking so much more profoundly than they even have a clue. Their articulated response tells us how they are interpreting what just happened. Do you get that? See, the great prophet Elijah had once happened upon a Sidonian village of Zarephath. And there he encounters a widow. And she's gathering things so that she might have one final meal so that her and her only son might die. The audacity of this prophet calls for her first to make him some bread. And lo and behold, after that, she never runs out of bread until the famine has passed. A little bit later, this is 1 Kings 17, the son of this woman became ill. And I think the Bible sometimes is hilarious. It explains the type of illness that he had. He became ill with such a severity that there was no more breath in him. Okay, so that kind of illness that produces death. Sorry, I just thought that was ironic. A situation so bleak. No breath remains. And so Elijah, the prophet of God, cries out to God, "Would you have mercy? Would you spare this child's life?" And God heard. The son was revived, and Elijah handed that son back to the widow. You see, so alike are the events of this exhibition and compassion that Jesus put on display, but the people sensed something similar was dawning on them in the reviving of the widow's son, even to the same sort of shadowing of this giving of the child back. Again, a classic case. The people spoke more profoundly than they even knew. Indeed, a great prophet has come. The Word made flesh, in point of fact. But certainly he is not just a prophet. Indeed, God has visited his people, the Son of God, in point of fact, not just a messenger, not just providential appointment to temporarily intervene, but to come and give life everlasting. If the prior miracle highlights Christ's authority and the centurion's faith, this miracle highlights Christ's uncontrollable compassion, even for a widow who's in sorrow. You see how beautiful this is? Empathy and authority combining in the person of Jesus Christ. And so when you see him rightly, you should make your appeal boldly. But even if your desperation is so great you can't even conceive of to ask for help, Jesus is so loaded with compassion, he'll come to you anyways. Desperate situations compel the compassion of Christ. Today's tandem stories illustrate all the more clearly the nature of Christ's authority, loaded with empathy, loaded with compassion. And we see this going back to chapter 4, the authority of this messianic claim. The Spirit of God is upon me. He's anointed me to do something, to declare good news that the kingdom of God has come and then to bring it into existence. And Luke wants you to see that. He says it in two different places right after that. He possessed authority in his teaching. And that's in verse 32. Verse 36, with authority and power he commanded unclean spirits. And he commanded for healing of diseases. We see Jesus has authority. And with each passing section, our perspective is being refined. And today, the complete picture is presented of this paradoxical prophet, Jesus Christ the Messiah, the one in whom has all authority, and yet he is approachable. He is all-knowing, and yet he's amazed by faith. He is all-powerful, but he is uncontrollably compassionate. That's where Gail would say, that's my king. And if desperate situations compel compassion of Christ, friends, that means nothing can stand in your way from exercising commendable faith today. But if you're like me, it seems like something always gets in the way of that kind of faith. When I was a kid, my parents took me to the doctor to get a physical. They probably thought something was wrong with me and didn't know what else to do. But they put me up on this bench. I was sitting on 4 feet of parchment paper trying to decide if we were about to make Christmas cookies. And out of nowhere, the doctor takes this funny-looking hammer and hits my leg, to which it kicks up in the air instinctively, uncontrollably, 16 inches high. I was offended, but I was also amazed. I watched him do it again. And the doctor was trained to read the response. It turns out that a 16-inch kick from a patellar tendon tap means you're A-okay. I wonder if we can train ourselves in similar fashion to read our responses to our desperate situations. What happens? What happens when you're desperate? What's your reflex look like? I wonder if we look at it, it'll help us to understand, is it Jesus we run to? Or is it someone or something else? For me, my default is to save myself. And if it's your problem, my default is to save you. You know, they call it a Messiah complex for a reason. It's because you're stepping into the spot that only Jesus can fill. And Christians are so good at doing Jesus' job, keeping him from the very people he loves, and feeling really good about themselves. Most frequently, at least lately, God gives me an idea or a thought or a passion, and this vision, this perspective, is so far beyond what I can accomplish. And you know, the answer is not going to be me trying harder. It's not going to be me working longer hours. It's not going to be me wishing harder or praying even harder. It's going to come from, if it's a God-sized gap, it turns out only God can fill that gap. That's true personally and organizationally. Which means God must want to use the process of your faith development. He wants you to pay attention to what the reflex of your unbelief looks like so that you can rightly train yourself to trust Jesus for the God-sized desperation you find yourself in right now. Jesus is bigger. Jesus is better. Jesus' shoulders can handle anything. But it doesn't mean he's going to do everything for you or everything that you want from him. We walk with him, yoked together with Christ, trusting his strength and moving at his pace. That's the Christian's way. Because isn't so the case? He loves us so much. His compassion is so uncontrollable. He keeps reaching after us even when the riptide of our misplaced or missing faith continues to ravish us. Jesus meets us in that place. When the desperate situations come, friends, you can trust the compassion of Christ to meet you where you are. So place your faith in him. Jesus, it feels like it got real there. And so I thank you that you're relevant. You're relevant not because of alliteration. You're relevant not because of application. You're relevant because you are Lord of all, and your compassion is so kind and good. And if you come to us in desperate situations, the landscape of our lives have desperation riddled all throughout them. Oh, Jesus, that we would be those like this centurion who recognize your authority. We would be those like this widow who understand your compassion and lean in with commendable faith, accepting your help because we need it. We've not been given the capacity in our finite bodies to do it apart from you. So thank you that your compassion moves toward us. Increase our faith. Would you be glorified in a faithful church, I pray. Amen.